All right, so female reproductive system. Initially the same as male, it's homologous. So when you're in your mom's, your biological mother's uterus, you look and present the same as any male would, right, if you're female. It's not until a little bit later that things start to differentiate. So the only way to tell the difference is by genetic testing, okay, initially. So that ball of mass, we don't know if it's going to turn into a boy or a girl until it starts to, display the male features or the female features, or we genetic test them. Now, females, the female sex has fluctuating hormone levels. So males have static numbers with a couple peaks once in a while. But females have them every 28 days, and that's where the complication occurs, right? With knowing about the system, not necessarily the system. The system is elegant, but remembering how the system works, it's these numbers that are going to kind of mess it up for us, right? To learn them. Every month, now it's on average actually 28 days. It's not monthly; it's 28 days on average. Now, some people, females have a faster menstrual cycle, and some have a slower menstrual cycle. But if we average the majority or the population of women, I'm not sure if this is just North America or the Western civilization or the whole world, but it's 28 days. That's what we use. Okay, so 28 days, you have an egg released. It's fertilized. It's not fertilized. Do it again. 28 days. Is it fertilized or not? Do it again. This is the female anatomy, and they have a couple bits the same as males, right? They got the rectum, that's the same as the male, and they have the bladder. And here is the P tube called the urethra. So we have those three bits in common, but in females, the urethra is completely separate from the birth canal. So the bladder is not even involved in reproduction with the female. So that's good. So we ignore this and we ignore this, then what you got is that, and that, 4 bits, and that's it. So super duper easy. None of this Cowper's, bulbar urethral, seminal, all those gone. So this is what we're going to label, and this is what we're looking at. And this is the side view. We'll start off with the first structure, the gonad. So the female gonad is number 3. And number 3 is right there. Number 2, which is complicated. So number 3 here, number 2 here. And that is called your ovary, okay? And that is the site of egg production. Now, as the video said, women are born, the females are born with 400,000 eggs, and that's it. You can't make more. Men make 400 million per ejaculate. So, we're a factory of making them. When you're born, you have your maximum already. You've been stocked with your eggs. And then every 28 days, a couple are chosen to go through a maturation process, but only one is actually released usually. Sometimes 2, and that's where you get fraternal twins. 2 are released accidentally instead of just 1. But that's where it happens at the good old ovary. Now, once the egg matures and you ovulate, it goes into this tube system right here. And these are called your fallopian tubes. And if you remember from the video, this is where the sperm has to find the egg, right? So sperm is deposited here, and they got to swim up here, and you think, okay, it should meet up with an egg here. Nope, it's got to go over here into one or the other. Now, you have 2 of them, and only one of them usually releases an egg per month. So half the sperm will go right, half the sperm will go left, and that's a 50-50 chance, because those 50 that chose right, when the egg's over here, they don't get to do anything. They just keep swimming. And they actually swim into your abdominal cavity, some of them. Whereas these ones are the lucky 50% that chose the right way, and it was just like flipping a coin. They didn't know. But it has to happen up here, and then fertilization, and then they divide, and they end up down here, and that's where it attaches. Now, these are actually, just like nerve cells, there's a gap here. So the egg has to actually jump the gap. And sometimes what happens is the egg comes out and it misses the gap and goes on the outside. So here's the fallopian tube. It's supposed to go down the tube. Sometimes it ends up out here. Now, if you go into hospital and you're complaining of abdominal pain, we can rule out maybe food poisoning, right? Or like, what did you eat? All this stuff. And then another one could be appendicitis, lower right-hand quadrant down here. And you're like, oh, it's supreme pain here. And then we could do blood tests to figure that out. But another one could be you're pregnant, and the egg, instead of coming this way, went out here, and now the egg is attached to your intestines or the outside of your uterus. And so if you're of reproductive age, one of the questions that you would get if you go into a hospital and you complain about abdominal pain is, when did you have unprotected sex last? Because there's a small chance that it could be, it's called an ectopic pregnancy. You have a pregnancy on the outside of your womb. And that, unfortunately, needs to be terminated. That needs to be removed, medically removed, surgically removed. Did I turn this thing on? I did, right? Yep. And then the tubes travel down into your uterus or your womb, right? And this is where the egg will attach, and then the mother will nourish the baby, the developing fetus, embryo, through the blood-rich lining of the uterus. Okay, and then this is where the baby gets bigger, and this is where the mummy's belly gets bigger. So, for a while there, you probably thought it was where the guts were or where the stomach was as a child, but now we know it's not in your stomach or your bowels. It's in your uterus that the baby develops. Next is the cervix, and this is the muscle ring that opens allowed birth of the fetus. So this is actually really cinched up tight. It's like, it's like a pinhole to look at, probably just a centimeter or less than a centimeter in diameter. And that's to make sure that you don't have bacteria or pathogens make it up and infect your ovaries or your uterus. So it's really narrow. Plus, if you become pregnant, you need something to kind of like close the container, I guess, but also open up to release the child too. So this thing here is your cervix, and that thing is literally like that big as we sit here. But if you were to become pregnant and it's time to have the baby, that door has to open up about 4 to 5 inches. And if you get contractions, like, I think the baby's coming. We actually don't ask you to push until it dilates a certain amount, because if it doesn't dilate enough, open up, you're just pushing up against the wall, and you're just going to get tired pushing up against the wall. So as much as there's pain and there's contraction and you want to expel the baby, we just say, just chill out, just conserve your energy. There's going to be a time for pushing, just not now. And we know, and with all our science and our techniques and stuff, this also is a digital exam to figure out if you're dilated enough. They put in your fingers, and they know by how many fingers, right? The doctor's been doing this so many times that they know by how many fingers that they can fit in that gap if you're ready to go or not. So it's a digital exam, and they can say 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers, and they go, okay, you're ready to push. They can also use something to look, but it's called a speculum, and they can also do a visual check on it. But usually they're so proficient at just like using their hands that they can tell. Then you got your birth canal, also known as your vagina, but it's your birth canal. This is where the baby comes down, past, and this is also where the male would deposit the semen as well. Okay. And you have analogous parts to the male anatomy too, and that includes the clitoris, which is analogous to the penis. And you females also have an analogous part to the scrotum, which is called the labia majora. So you have some boys have the pouches. Women usually just have some skin folds there, but those are analogous to the male parts because we all started off kind of the same. Yeah, and just different parts turned into different functions in the end. So this is the color picture. And I showed you this one. This is the rectum. This is the bladder. This is the ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, cervix. There's the vagina or the birth canal. And then here's the clitoris. And then there's the labia majora minora. And those are the ones that are analogous to the male's scrotum, and that's analogous to the penis. And in some countries, in some cultures, you guys have heard of the female genital mutilation, FGM. Some cultures, they rip that out like a tooth. In some cultures, I think it's primarily African cultures, and so there's a big push to stop that female genital mutilation. But that's a rite of passage for some cultures for females. It sounds terrible. Now, orgasm females is not actually necessary for sexual reproduction. Males, that's to actually have the muscle contraction to expel the sperm. Males have to have orgasm. Females don't. But at the same time, they think there's some benefit to it because it creates some different fluids that might support the transportation or the motility of sperm. And it may actually have some assistance in motility of sperm by its contractions. But in fact, good or bad, the end result is the female does not have to orgasm to become pregnant, right? Just to, I guess, clarify things. Fertilization, this is how it happens. Egg is released from ovaries. It goes into the fallopian tubes, and good old sperm meets it there. And then sperm fuses to make something called a zygote, which is a haploid cell makes a diploid cell. That's the handshaking. And then the diploid cell travels down the fallopian tube, takes a couple days, maybe 5-6 days. And while it's happening, it's releasing, it's dividing. You can't tell if you're pregnant now, right? So if you pee on a stick, you can't tell if you're pregnant. It's not until it binds to the uterine wall that your body actually starts producing another hormone, and that's the hormone we're testing for when you pee on your stick. And the peeing on the stick is very, very accurate. If you pee on a stick and it says you're pregnant, you can buy 100 other pee sticks, and guess what they're all going to say? You're pregnant. There are very, very few false positives with the pee stick looking for that hormone. Okay? Now, I'm not saying it could be wrong. It could be wrong, but very unlikely. So, if you're pregnant, you can buy more sticks, or you can go to the doctors and get tested by their kit and just confirm it. Right? They're not cheap. It arrives at the uterus, and it's about 100 cells big. Now it's an embryo. It'll attach into the uterine wall, and then you get something called a placenta forming. Okay? So membranes wrap around the body, and then you get this giant pancake patty that sticks to the mom's uterine wall. And this is how you get your nutrients to your baby. The gases just go from the blood capillaries from the mother that are tangled with the blood capillaries of the baby. And then gases go in, gases go out, nutrients go in, nutrients go out, water goes in, water goes out. But your blood actually doesn't mix. And that's important because if your blood mixed, you couldn't be a different blood type to your mom. Because your mother would treat you like a foreign body and kill you using an immune response. Right? You'd be killed. So there's no blood mixing at all. 9 months later, baby. And if you have a natural birth, a normal vaginal birth, you birth the baby, and then later you birth the afterbirth. So you actually have 2 birthing steps. You birth the baby, and then you birth the after stuff. And it's really important to have the afterbirth come out because you don't want it to stay in. It'll just rot. But also because it's going to detach, and you just want to make sure there is not uncontrolled bleeding. Because if you, and that would be one of the things that would have caused life expectancy to be so low way back when. Because women would have their babies and then die after birth because they just bleed to death. So, so that's why people go, well, why are we, living into our 80s and 90s, and then back in the old days it'd be like 30s, 40s, because we counted women that died at birth, right, as dying naturally at that age. And then babies that died at birth were counted as zeros. So they were all averaged in. So even if the life expectancy back then was 40, you got to include all the mothers that died and all the babies that died at birth, which would have been really young. Okay. So those medical advances just in that one area alone would have added 20, 30 years to our overall life expectancy. Just better birthing techniques and better child care. Right? Exponentially, our number went way up then to like 60, 70, 80. Egg production. Eggs are produced in the ovaries, right? The female gonads. The process is called oogenesis, genesis of oocytes. Oocytes are eggs. We call them ova, ovum. There's lots of names for eggs. Oocytes, ovum, ova. Now you are, all the females here, born with 400,000 immature eggs, and we call the immature eggs follicles. You don't have any more, you don't have any less. You can't make any more. And when you hit puberty, these will go into a mature every 28 days into something called an ova. Some people call them secondary oocytes. So a handful of these will be chosen to go through meiosis and divide into a primary oocyte, into a secondary oocyte, and of those, only one of them will survive. The rest of them, right, if there's 2 or 3 of these chosen, and they go through meiosis, and each of them produce 4 cells, only one of these 3, and all those other ones that were chosen, they disintegrate. And usually there's only one. Sometimes there's 2, right? If you have fraternal twins, that's what happens. But usually 1. And that lucky one is released, and that's called ovulation. That happens around day 14. And then the thing that was holding the immature egg turns into something called a corpus luteum. Corpus meaning body, and luteum means hollow. It's a hollow body. And this thing is super duper important because it releases a whole bunch of special, really important hormones. So here's the eggs that you're born with. You have 400,000 of these. A couple of them are chosen to mature, and then one of them gets to here. The rest of them disintegrate. And then it pops like the blister that we saw in the video, that red yucky thing. It looked like, an eyeball, and then out came out that crystal clear kind of group of cells. That would be that thing. And then that red thing that looked kind of yucky, right? It's natural and it's important, so it's not yucky, but it kind of looked kind of like a bloodshot eye, which was not pleasant. It turns into this thing, which is a hollow body, and that thing releases hormones into your blood. Now, if you become pregnant, it keeps going, and if you become, you don't become pregnant, it disintegrates itself. And then it starts over again, and you do it again, 28 days, 28 days, 28 days, 28 days, okay? So the last thing we want to chat about, we'll take 5 minutes, is just the menstrual cycle. You have the menstrual cycle. 28 days on average, and I know some of you will say, hey, Mr. J, mine is longer, mine is shorter. On average, the general population, 28 days. And there's 2 steps, 2 processes are happening. One is in your ovaries, right, those 2 dots. And then the other one is happening at your uterus at the same time. So there's a schedule for the ovaries, and there's a schedule for the uterus, and they're happening in step with each other. In the ovaries, you're making an egg. In the uterus, you're getting ready for a baby. Now, the uterus is a really strange organ because it's kind of like if we're like, oh man, COVID's over. We're going to invite our cousins over. And like, yay, cousins are coming over. Let's set up the spare room. So the uterus does it this way. Gets a bed, puts on the blankets, decorates the room, and then you get news. Cousins can't come. One of them got sick. You're like, darn it. So what do? You throw everything out. That's what the uterus does. They throw out the bed, they throw out the decorations, they just make an empty room. And then your mom goes, they're coming next week. You're like, awesome. So what do? You buy a new bed, you put in a new mattress, right? You put in new sheets, you decorate it again, and they go, bad news, their car broke down. You're like, damn it. And then you throw everything out again. That's what the uterus does, right? So let's take a look at the ovarian cycle. In the ovaries, this is what's happening. Now, day 1 is your period. So the majority of us know what that is. So on the very first day of your period, that's day 1. Okay? And in your ovaries, from day 1 through day 13, one of the follicles is turning into a mature egg. Day 14, the egg is released into the fallopian tubes. Then day 15 through 28, the egg is fertilized and arrives at the uterus, or it's not fertilized and it arrives at the uterus. Okay? If it's fertilized, it attaches. 9 months later, baby. If it's not fertilized, you have your menstrual period and everything gets flushed out. And you start again. Okay? And this is what it looks like. Day 1, one follicle matures. Day 14, you ovulate. And this is, if you're trying to become pregnant, if you've chosen with your partner to become pregnant and you're a male-female relationship, this is when you would try to have sex, right there. And if you're a couple days too early, it may not work. And if you're a couple days too late, it may not work. This is your window of time, right here. And it's very narrow. As much as we love to tell you you have to be careful all the time, which is true. The actual highest likelihood that you'll become pregnant is a very narrow window of time. Ovulates. It travels through the fallopian tubes into your uterus. Corpus luteum appears, makes hormones. If you become pregnant, it sticks like that for a long, long time. If you don't become pregnant, it disintegrates. And then what happens in your uterus? Well, this is what happens in your uterus. Day 1, your period. Okay, it can last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. Don't know. Something like that. I'm sure it depends on the person and all that stuff. And what's happening here is you're losing the lining of your uterus. So tissue, blood vessels, and cells and mucus is all coming out because you're shedding a layer of your uterus, which is incredible because you used up all that energy to make it up, and now you're just going to get rid of it, which is just the human way of doing it, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. And it's called your period or your menses. Now, day 6 through 14, it starts rebuilding again to get ready for pregnancy. And day 14 is when ovulation happens, right? So it's at its thickest and most ready right here. And it keeps getting thicker, and it starts producing mucus, and it's like, I'm ready for pregnancy. And if the egg attaches, awesome. 9 months later, baby. If an egg arrives but it's not fertilized, or it doesn't attach, sometimes it just doesn't attach, then you have your menstrual period and all of that stuff comes back out. It gets washed out, and you start again. Okay, a lot of resources, a lot of energy, it feels like. This is it. So this is your endometrial lining. This is the part that builds up, and then this is the part that sheds every 28 days. This is what it looks like. So here's your period. So you lose your layer, and look how thin it is now. And then through the proliferative phase, it builds back up. This is where ovulation comes, and the egg's going to be there in about 2, 3, 4, 5 days. So look how much thicker and thicker and thicker it gets, and it starts secreting mucus and stuff like that. It's called the secretory phase because of that, because it's secreting mucus. And then it finds out, darn it, not pregnant, flush it all out. Or, oh, darn it, pregnant. I don't know what your feeling is. It all depends, I guess, on where you are in your life. But if you're pregnant, it stays thick, and it nourishes the baby. 9 months later, you have a baby, right? So that's called the uterine cycle. And this, they match up. So period, and while that's happening, a follicle is forming. It gets thicker, thicker, and thicker. Right here, you ovulate. It keeps getting thicker and thicker and thicker. This thing gets fertilized or not. Corpus luteum kicks in, helps make this thing even thicker and becomes secretory. If you're pregnant, this thing sticks around. The mucus, your endometrial layer stays thick. You form a placenta, you have a baby. If you don't become pregnant, it sloughs off, that thing disappears. Start again. Okay? So next day, we're going to talk about the hormones that are involved. So it's a 28-day cycle of hormones as well. And you can see why this takes time, this one here. Okay? So these are the hormones we're going to talk about. LH, FSH, estrogen and progesterone. So 4 hormones we have to talk about. Whereas boys were just testosterone controlled by LH and FSH. Awesome, we're done. Any questions? Good. I hope you find this interesting. This is